Warhammer, huh? Nice. But you know, it can be a bit overwhelming to get into, but don't worry, I got your back. So let's get you started the right way, an approach that'll grow with you all through your hobby journey. You know, I've been thinking a lot lately. If I could go back in time and start this hobby all over again, what are the steps most valuable for a beginner? Oftentimes, the approach or techniques taught to painters aren't meant to grow with you. They're just meant to get you started, and then you have to unlearn or relearn some things later. Seems inefficient. So instead, let's get you started with the key basic steps that I think are most vital to a new painter and will grow with you when you inevitably fall in love with this hobby. Now today we're just going to focus on the bare minimum of tools and steps you'll need to learn how to build and paint your Warhammer models. The last thing we need is anyone to get overwhelmed before you even get this plane off the ground. With that out of the way, let's get started. The first thing you're going to need is a nice, sturdy, flat surface to paint on. Ideally something that you're not going to get in trouble if you occasionally dribble a little paint on it. Make sure your painting surface isn't too low while you're in the seated position. The last thing you want is to lean over while you're painting. You also want to make sure that you can rest either your forearms or your wrists right on the table when you're painting. That'll really support you and make sure that you can hit those tiny details. Any chair with back support will do. I started with just a cheap folding chair. Sure, my butt hurt after an hour, but I got the job done. The last thing you're going to need is lighting, not just the lighting in your room, ideally, having some kind of a desk lamp. Even a cheap one from IKEA or Amazon works just great. I still to this day use one of my first lights whenever I go to the gaming store to paint or to conventions. It's portable, I can set it up, and it gives me nice bright light in my painting area. All right, we cool? Good. All right, so let's assemble our models first. Now, Warhammer models are plastic, and they come on these sheets known as sprues. So the first thing we need to do is take off the individual pieces we need to assemble our model. The included instruction booklet lays out which numbered pieces we need and the order to assemble them in. Do follow the steps in order in the instruction booklet. Oftentimes, these models have a lot of pieces, and you may screw up the whole building process if you don't. You just cut off the numbered pieces the instructions tell you to with a clipper. Now, like anything in this hobby, there are tons of different options, oftentimes some very expensive ones, but just a basic clipper you can get from a big box home improvement store works just great. This one only cost me a couple of bucks. Oh, and I'll put links down to the tools in the video description should you want to pick up anything on Amazon, and those are affiliate links, so they support me as well. Thank you if you choose to use those. The one trick you need to keep in mind with clipping your bits is that you do not want to clip them flush to where they meet the connecting part on the sprue, but leave a small amount of that extra plastic attached. If you cut right where they attach to this little extra bit, you're likely to gouge into your model, oftentimes harming the details that you're going to have to paint later. Now that you have your pieces removed from the sprue, it's time to clean them up a little bit. And with that, we just need a plain old hobby blade, also known as an X-Acto blade. Carefully remove that little bit of sprue still attached to your piece. Don't use too much force here. Just let the blade do the work. And do your best to keep your fingers out of the way while you're doing this step. Now, you're likely going to cut yourself at some point in your hobby journey, and that's okay. We all do it. But as long as you're not putting too much pressure and pushing too hard on that blade, you're not going to cause much damage. Now, the only other cleanup step before gluing is optional, but I do highly recommend it. You see, every single piece on your Warhammer sprue has what's called a mold line running all the way around it, exactly lining up with the edge of this sprue. Now, with the side of your hobby blade, you can gently scrape off that little mold line. And it may look like it's hard to see right now, but trust me, once you start putting paint on it, that paint will catch that ridge and it'll stick out like a sore thumb. So any bits of these mold lines you can reach right now, just scrape them off. The last step of our assembly process is gluing our model together. Now, like I said, Warhammer models are plastic, and that means we actually don't want to be using super glue. We want to use something known as plastic cement. This stuff creates a chemical bond that melts the plastic bits together. Also, it won't glue your fingers together, which I do all the time with the super glue. I prefer the Tamiya extra thin cement, the one that has a nice little brush inside of it. This makes it super easy to glue my pieces together with that brush applicator. Now first, you're gonna wanna dry fit your pieces. Make sure they fit together just how you want them to. Then you put a little bit of the glue on just one of the two pieces you're gluing together. Push them together, hold them for about 10 seconds, and wham, congratulations, you are now a glue master. I also like to brush some glue right down the seam where two pieces meet. This will melt the plastic slightly and hide the seam entirely, making it look like your model was cast from a single piece of plastic. Once your model is fully assembled, you can glue it to the base, and then we get to add a little life to the environment on that base itself. Now, there are all sorts of texture pastes, really fine grass tufts, and fun things that you can buy, but I prefer something free, and that's just a handful of dirt and sand from my yard outside. I set my locally sourced dirt spread out in a sunny window for a week or so until all the moisture is gone, and then I keep it in a plastic tub. To adhere it to my base, I thin down some generic white glue with water so it flows a little easier, and then brush a layer onto the base. I sprinkle on my dirt and I wait a few minutes to let that dry. Once that glue is dried, I can go back in with another thinned layer right over the top to really set in all of that dirt and rock so it's not going to go anywhere. The first layer of paint we need to put on our model is called primer. This protects all subsequent layers of paint from chipping or scratching off. Also, it helps those paint layers adhere to the primer, which is much easier than adhering to slippery bare plastic. Now, spray can primers do work best, but there are brush on surface primers you can use if you don't have a good place to use a spray can. This stuff will take a few layers, and you're going to want to thin it a little bit first, and it won't be quite as protective as this stuff, but if you need to, you can use it. A few tricks I want to share when it comes to priming. Make sure you shake that rattle can a lot for at least a few minutes. Then, as you're applying it, do it in a sweeping motion so you do not begin the spray pointed directly at the model. If you do that, you can accidentally hose down the model with too much paint and obscure those details. I prefer to prime my models black because when I'm painting, if there's a hard to reach area that I can't get to with my brush, I just leave it unpainted and it looks like a dark shadow. If I painted it white, it would stick out like a sore thumb and be ridiculous looking. So, all right, I bet you think we are now going to start painting. Wrong. There are a couple of things I want to throw your way first, and I promise this is going to be quick. These are the most important products that you're going to need for miniature painting. No extra stuff that you can either buy for cheap or make yourself. Make yourself? Yeah, that's right. We're going to make our very own wet palettes together today. What's a wet palette, you ask? Good question. Gold star for the day. In miniature painting, we use acrylic-based paints, and this stuff is water-based, and water evaporates naturally in the environment, especially when we use really thin paint with a lot of water. So a standard dry well palette is going to evaporate really quickly and frustrate you as your paint starts to gum up and doesn't act like you want it to. Enter the basic wet palette. This keeps a level of hydration for our paints right underneath the palette surface. So you can either buy one of these yourself, like this fancy one with my logo on it, but you can make one with stuff you already have around the house and try it out first. All you're going to need is some kind of a plastic lid like this one here. Now, take a folded paper towel and put that inside your plastic lid. Soak that paper towel really well with water so it's damn near floating. Now, cut a piece of parchment paper roughly the same size as your paper towel and lay that directly on top of that wet paper towel. Hold it down by the corners for a few seconds so it doesn't curl up, and it's going to stick down firmly. The top of our parchment paper will stay dry, but because it's directly on top of that wet surface, it's going to keep that hydration level really stable. If that seemed like a lot, don't worry. Once you start painting, you'll be grateful you did. And the rest of this stuff is really easy. First up is paints. Now, I do highly recommend that you use actual miniature paints made for miniature painting. There are a wide variety of really good brands out there, so I recommend you go to a local store if you have one and see what brand they carry and buy those because you can always buy them a couple at a time. Paint brushes. Now, this might be a controversial take, but I think from the very beginning, you should try using a nice natural hair brush. Now, a lot of people will tell you to just use synthetic brushes. Well, even though these are super cheap, they're going to curl at the tip or splay, and you're going to be frustrated because you can't paint the little details of your little models. I've found that there are some decent quality sable hair brushes in packs on Amazon these days for surprisingly cheap. I think the growth of the miniature painting hobby has caused more of these to hit the market and their prices to drop. One single brush that's either a size 1 or a size 2 will be used for about 80 to 90% of your miniature painting. So that's all you're going to need for most of your work. The only other brush that I tend to use is a larger synthetic brush that I can beat up, that I can use to apply that glue to my base, or I can slap down big quick base coats on the base or on larger parts of the model. Now, when you're painting your model, you don't want to just hold on to it by the base. You want to have a little bit more range of motion, more comfortability, more stability, so you want some kind of a painting handle. Luckily, all of us have something hanging around the house that we can use as a painting handle. Just take a bit of poster tack and put it on the top of a block of spare wood, maybe a wine cork, maybe an old pill bottle, or I think this was used for some kind of spices or something. Last things you're going to need are a cup of water to rinse your brush out in, and then a sheet of paper towel. Don't worry, I will share the virtues of the paper towel once we get to the painting. There is one optional tool that you absolutely do not need, but I would be remiss not to recommend it, and those are magnifiers. I didn't use these for the longest time, but once I started, I realized how much easier it was to see all the teeny tiny details on these Warhammer models. And these things are only like 10 to 15 bucks on Amazon. So yeah, if you can't see it, you can't paint it. And these really do help with all the awesome little details on our models. Woo! Let's get to painting this orc. The first thing we're gonna do is take a drop of paint and put it on our wet palette. And then we're gonna mix in one brush full of water with that drop of paint. This thins the paint down a bit so it applies more smoothly and easily. Goopy, thick paint is always your enemy, so this step is crucial at all levels of miniature painting. Once you've mixed that little bit of water into your paint, you'll have paint on your brush and you'll immediately want to start painting your model. Do not, no. Instead, take that brush that now has paint all over it and rinse it out in your water cup and dry it on your paper towel, twisting it to keep that nice sharp tip while you're drying it off. Now you have a clean brush and you're ready to begin painting. Go back to your newly thinned paint on your palette and load up with the paint about halfway up the bristles. We do not want paint to get all the way up to the metal ferrule on the brush. It'll get dried up there and it'll split your bristles and ruin your brush. From here, we dab the brush back on our paper towel so it's not overloaded with paint and moisture. Then, and only then, do we start painting our model. You know, John, you just made it seem like I had to go through 40 steps just to put paint onto my model. And I apologize, but this really is the most important thing of this entire video. Loading your brush and thinning your paint so you have maximum control, so the paint goes exactly where you want on these tiny little figures, is so invaluable. It will make this hobby incredibly enjoyable or incredibly frustrating, how well you do this step on a continuous basis. Most of the frustrations from new painters come from not doing these steps and then wondering why they can't paint within the lines or the tiny details. But now you know, and you are gonna crush it from the get-go. Today's video is brought to us by Milanote, and this is perfect timing because they have such an amazing free tool for new miniature painters. Milanote is a productivity, creativity, and organization tool that I use for so many aspects of miniature painting. It's also great for all sorts of work-related and adulting things, but we're not going to talk about that today. Starting a brand new project, like say a Warhammer army, is super easy with Milanote because it's got over 100 templates built in, so you can get right to the creative work quickly. See, I wish I had Milanote when I was brand new to miniature painting. If you find a paint job done by somebody else, whether it be the box art or by some miniature artist you find on Instagram, just grab the picture and pull it into Milanote. Now take the color picker tool and make swatches of each color used to paint the model. Now you know what colors you need. Then just Google up color sheets for the paint range that you use or want to buy and find the closest match, and wham, you know exactly what paints to use to match that paint job. You can flesh out your boards by faction, certain kinds of models, and even put boards within boards so you can flesh out an entire army scheme. I've used Milanote over the years for all sorts of projects from big to small. From fleshing out my full Skaven army and noting the exact paints I use for my scheme, to full mood boards to design my Mad Max themed 40k orc army.
I love how intuitive and easy to use it is. I never watched any how-to videos on how to use Milanote. I just mess around for a bit, and before you know it, you'll get the hang of everything you need to know.
So if you want to spend very little time to make your projects, whether for work or for your hobby, that much more successful, please be sure to check out the link down in the video description to try out Milanote for free with no time limit. That's right, Ninja viewers get to use Milanote for free for as long as you want, because they just want you to use an awesome product and they know you're gonna love it. Now, what order do we paint our stuff in? I like to paint my models from inside out. What that means is I start with the innermost surface. Oftentimes, that's the skin. Then I paint each material that's laid on top of that surface, like the shirt that's on the skin, then the coat that's over the shirt, and the necklace that's over the coat, etc. This way, if you make mistakes, and you will make mistakes, don't worry, we all do, no matter how long we've been doing this, you're more likely to make them on an area that you haven't even painted yet, and you're just gonna paint over again later anyway. Now, as you're applying these base coats, you may notice that the paint looks splotchy, and it isn't covering fully over your primer. That is perfectly okay. You are not doing anything wrong. There is nothing wrong with your brand of paint. Do not think you should be using thicker paint. You shouldn't, because we're going over black primer, and because acrylic paint is inherently somewhat transparent, it's going to take a few coats to get full coverage. And even if you think the paint looks good after one coat, do not believe your eyes. Always paint at least 2 or 3 coats. Those thin layers need to build on top of each other to show you the true paint color that you're using. That black primer underneath will darken and muddy your colors. So we need to have a little patience and let the color vibrancy build up over those 2 or 3 layers. If you ever see a paint job, whether it's yours or someone else's, and the colors seem a little muted or dulled, that's because they didn't do this step. Always do your 3 layers of base coats and you're gonna have much more vibrant, punchy models. Now, if you make a mistake in this step, don't stress out and try to fix it right away. Just let that paint dry, move on to painting something else, and come back in later to correct it with the correct base color. It may take a few coats to cover that mistake, but that's okay. And take your time while you're doing this base coating. It's a pretty relaxing and fun step. The biggest mistake I see new painters make when it comes to painting is they try to paint too fast. You first need to walk before you can run, and that applies to all things, including gaining a skill with a paintbrush. By going slow, you learn what works and what doesn't, and you get immediate visual feedback. And as you grow in your skill with the brush, your speed will improve automatically. Now we're going to use metallic paint to paint the metals on this model. Duh. For the most part, metallic paints will work just like any other paint, other than the fact that they have these little shiny particles in there that create that shiny effect. Now, I do find that I want to thin these slightly less than regular paints. I only use a damp brush that I've just touched in my water cup and dabbed out on the paper towel to thin them. Just that little bit of moisture in my brush is enough to thin that metal paint down. If I thin it down too much, all those little particles that create that shine start to separate, and it becomes a little bit of a mess. And just like everything else we're base coating, take your time and apply 2 or 3 layers to get that full shine effect. We now have a fully painted model. Well, kind of. I mean, it has paint all over it, but It doesn't really look three-dimensional, does it? It just looks like a singular color. But don't worry, we can remedy that very easily. Let's add some depth of color through shadows. And to do this, we're going to use what's known as a wash or a shade. Now, many miniature paint companies do offer a specific product called a wash or a shade, and by and large, they're amazing and they work really quickly. Later on in your painting journey, you'll learn how to use very thinned down paint to create a similar effect with more control, but for now, let's use these. These washes are formulated to run into the recesses of your model, settling into those regions and making them look darker. You can create a more subtle look by thinning down your wash a little bit with water on your brush prior to putting it on, or you can use it straight out of the bottle for a more striking effect. Do your best to push the wash into those recessed low-lying areas. We want it to pool there and not on the raised areas. Washes have a longer working time than most miniature paint, so push them around a little bit until they settle where you want them to. You can prevent too much pooling of the wash by not loading up too much on your brush to begin with. But if that happens, you can always quickly clean your brush in your water cup, dab it on the paper towel, and then use it to soak up where that paint is pooling in a recess on your model. Now, the two washes you're going to use the most often are a black wash and a brown wash, because most things really look good with just that applied, and that's most what we're using today. But I do like a skin wash for human skin, or I'm using like a blue-green for the orc skin today, because I want to keep that vibrant, and the brown and black washes will desaturate. Remember how I said you can take any miniature paint and turn it into some form of a wash? Well, you're doing so well today that I think let's dip our toes in and show you how we can do that with some red on the mouth of this orc. I take just a tiny bit of that red paint and I add more and more water to it until it looks kind of like food coloring water. It's just barely tinted with red and it's super watery. Typically, this is about 5 drops of water and one tiny little brush tip of red paint. Once this is mixed, I place it into the orc's mouth, even over his teeth. It's going to settle into the cracks and crevices of his mouth, but it will leave those teeth stained, which I kind of like the look of anyway. Since you have this red mix, you might as well experiment with it. I put a little around his eyes and even in his ears because it's going to dry very faint, but it looks like a natural coloration and irritation. Once you slop some of that wash all over the base of your model, congrats, you are done. What a good looking model that you've made. Unless you don't want to be done yet. You don't want to be done, do you? I think you want to go one step further, and don't feel pressured. If you want to be done right now, be done right now and be proud of your work. But I want to add a few highlights to my orc to really push him over the top. You see, we've established our base colors, our shadows, and the last step to really bring this model into a three-dimensional nature is to highlight the raised areas. Now, what colors do you use to paint your highlights? That's a valid question. You can just take a paint slightly brighter than the one you used for the base color, but that means you're going to have to buy a whole lot of paints and you're brand new to this. Instead, I like to mix in maybe a little bit of yellow and a little bit of white or off-white to my base color. This adds just a little bit of vibrancy and a little bit of brightness to that base color, so these highlights will stand out. For our base layers, remember we did 1 brush full of water for 1 drop of paint. For these highlight layers, I typically use 2 brushfuls of water for 1 drop of paint. This will thin it just a little bit more, and that'll create a natural transition between this lighter color and the base color underneath. I use this highlight color to touch raised bits on the organic surfaces, like his eyebrows, his cheekbones, his knuckles, even some raised muscles. For hard edge surfaces, touch just the edges of those surfaces and the corners with your highlight color. Now this step does require a little bit more patience and precision with your brush as you're just trying to barely graze the tiny details of your model. But remember that if you follow the same steps to load your brush and wick off the excess paint and moisture on the paper towel like I showed you in the base coating step, you'll get the hang of this pretty quickly because you'll have control of the paint. And again, don't rush. This is not a race, and there's no right or wrong. You can stop whenever you feel like the model looks done to you. Don't keep going until the point that you get frustrated. There are no rules in miniature painting. That is one of the joys of art. You just do what seems fun and excites you. By working on highlights like this, you're building practice in layering up paint and showcasing all the interesting details on your model. I know that when I first started doing miniature painting, this was a frustrating step, but after a while, it's become my favorite part. I get to really see the model come to life in this step, and all that work up to this is really starting to pay off as I just see how cool this model looks coming together. To quickly knock out the highlights on the base, I take some paint directly out of a bottle, put it on my wet palette, and I dab my big brush into that without thinning it at all. I then wipe most of that paint off on a paper towel, so it's mostly dry. And then as I swipe this dry brush over the details on the base, it's just gonna catch those top raised surfaces. This is called dry brushing and allows us to get quick details to make that base look interesting in next to no time. And now, for real, we are done. Congratulations, you have painted a model. Take a moment and pat yourself on the back. Take a look at that. You did that. That was gray plastic just not that long ago, and you turned this sheet of Warhammer plastic into a beautiful, one-of-a-kind miniature. Not many people can say that they've done that. Let's be honest, most people that watch YouTube videos, miniature painting included, don't get to the point of actually creating. And I think you can do it. It is so much fun. You'll be so proud of yourself, and before you know it, you will be knee-deep in the Warhammer hobby. And with each model you build and paint, your skills will improve, and before you know it, you'll be shocked at how good your models look. And the foundational steps we went through today will grow with you. These steps will continue to guide you on the path, and soon you'll pick up new tips, tricks, skills, and techniques, and you will be a proficient miniature painter. But it all starts with one, and you got through the one today. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I hope you had some fun. I had a blast painting up this orc and going through what I think is the ideal way for someone new to the hobby to jump right in. If you like me and you want to help me out, please subscribe to the channel and join me on all the other miniature painting that we do here. Your support in watching my videos means more than anything, so sincere thank you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going back to my painting desk to paint another model, but I'll be back again next week with another new video. Just make sure that sometime between now and then, you find time in your day to slay the gray.